G'day there, Ray Corcoran here. In this week's video, I'm going to be going over 6 things that I look for when I am picking a specific house in a region that I'm looking at. So by this point, you would have picked the suburb or the region that you've done your analysis on the location, and now you're trying to look for a specific house. So in this video, I'm just going to talk about a few things that I look for when I'm looking at individual properties, some of the things I like, some of the things I don't like, and it's by no means an exhaustive list, but it will give you something to think about in terms of when you are inspecting properties, what are some of the qualities that may make it more appealing in terms of capital growth over time and also making it easier to rent. So the first one is the block itself. So typically I like to do over 500 square meters. There's no sort of hard and fast rule or anything, but for me personally, 400 starts to get a little bit tight in terms of the block size, and I don't usually go for duplex or half blocks or anything like that. I'd rather something that is enough space. Another thing is making sure it's not a weird shaped block. You can get these weird, battle axe shaped blocks and all sorts of different sort of weird layouts. Generally, where possible, I would rather get a square or standard rectangle sort of shape block. Another thing as well is making sure that it's all level or as level as possible. So you may see some houses where it's on a 1,000 square meter large block, but it's slanted like that. And for you to build on it would be either not viable or very, very difficult. Generally the way it works is a developer will want to have the maximum amount of house on the land that they have and make the most of it so they can make the most money. But if you're an investor, you want the most amount of land and you don't want to pay as much for the house. Having a really, really fancy house on the block is great, but you're going to pay a premium for that, and whoever made that will make the money, not you. So generally, if you can get the crappiest house and the biggest amount of land for your budget, generally that will be a better way to go. So yeah, just thought I'd mention that. Number 2 is the street. So obviously just the basics of street appeal. You don't want to have people just leaving junk on their front lawn, and just generally a place where people don't mow their front lawns and little things like that in terms of overall cleanliness. Also in terms of the street, you don't want a street that is either A, a main road, or B, it's kind of a bit of a morning rat run for people where a lot of traffic uses your maybe quiet street as a bit of a way to get through to the main road or avoid traffic in the morning. The street that I grew up on actually was like that. It was it's only a very short street, but everybody used it as a way to get from one suburb or one region to another, and everybody went through that way. So there's a lot of traffic on that road in the morning, which was annoying. So generally you kind of want to get something that's obviously a bit out of the way in the region you want, but not one of the main sort of morning runs that people will typically do. And aside from the noise and the traffic, also for people with kids, typically they don't want to have their kids, run out and get hit by a car if there's heaps of cars all the time. Generally people will prefer, quieter streets where possible. Just for safety reasons. And the street should ideally be within a good school catchment area, but also not next door to the school itself. Obviously that would have crazy traffic at 3 p.m. every day. You want to make sure that you are within the catchment and within a good distance to the school, ideally if you can. Another thing in terms of the street as well, you want to look at kind of the high side and the low side of the street. So there's going to be some streets where it's on a bit of a slant, and the left-hand side of the street will have all the houses on the high side, and then you'll have all the houses down on the low side. And depending on where you buy, that may not be applicable, but it's something to keep in mind. A place where I actually run past every morning, there's houses on the left-hand side that have most of the sunlight, and that's the good side of the street. And then there's the other side of the street where it's kind of a little bit lower. All the rain kind of runs off into their properties, and there's a bunch of trees, and it's generally like really dark and damp, and it's not, I love trees, but it's kind of quite damp all the time, and I wouldn't be surprised if those houses are more susceptible to stuff like mold and that sort of thing. And just generally, like, you want a bit of sunlight in your house. Trees are great, but this is kind of like the other extreme of that spectrum. So you also just want to have a look at, another thing is flood zones. So depending on which regions, I was looking at some investment properties in Queensland, and certain streets were actually flagged as flood zones. So you might see a house that might be 2 streets away, so very, very close, but it's a little bit cheaper. And you might be like, oh, this is a deal, but in fact it wasn't a deal. And that is actually prone to flooding. You may pay more for insurance. You may just get flooding, period. So you could be up for potentially repairs if that floods, which some places it can flood on quite a regular basis. So that's just something to keep in mind. So always look at the region that you're in. Are you close to a river? Is it quite low to sea level, that particular property? Some things to keep in mind in terms of the street. Number 3 is the floor plan. So typically, like with all these tips, you want to go stock standard, wide appeal. You don't really want to go for stuff that only a small number of the population would actually like or consider. There are some really, really quirky houses out there. There are some places that have all sorts of different layouts, or they don't have enough bathrooms relative to how many bedrooms there are. Some bedrooms are so small that it's like you couldn't really make that a bedroom. Even for a kid, it doesn't really make sense. There's also weird stuff, like I've seen houses where there's a toilet, there's a second toilet, but it's kind of accessed from outside the house. So it's connected to the house, but you have to enter it from so you have to go outside, and if it's raining, you need to go out in the rain and then enter it from the side. So there's always these really weird layouts. I want a very, very standard, boring layout, to be honest, that is appealing to a lot of people. And just, people think, when people are inspecting a property, maybe a few years down the track that you want to sell it, or people that are inspecting it to rent from you, they're just looking at the layout and just thinking, yep, I can see myself living here. And put yourself in the shoes of the renter or the future buyer. Anything quirky or random, you generally want to shy away from. Number 4 is the design of the home. So there's actually a house that in a region that I've been looking at buying in for our family home, and the house is a very weird design. It doesn't look too bad, but it's a very, very unusual layout. The facade of the house is very strange. If you're kind of pulling in your car into the driveway, it's just a weird shaped house, very different to all other houses on the market. And that house has been sitting on the market for so long now. I'm not sure how many days it's been on market, but I knew that house would take forever to sell. And I think the sellers will have to have a conversation with the agent in terms of like reducing the price, because it'll never move if they keep the price as high as it is right now. But there's not many people, like I couldn't picture myself living there with my family, and I bet many other families couldn't picture themselves living there either. It was a decent sized block, but the layout of the house is weird. There's, where the stairs are, everything was kind of just a bit out of whack, and it was very, very quirky. And sure, there might be one person that really, really loves that style, but for most people, they're going to look at that and be like, nah, too weird, not interested. And you don't want that as an investor. You want stuff that people want to rent and people that want to buy from you maybe years down the track should you decide to sell. Same for any like real niche styles. So if a house is like very 50s style, or some houses are very, very like quite tacky in terms of like really over the top furnishing, or some people like really like classical style, I don't know, 70s style furnishing or whatever it is. But there's going to be all these like niche styles. You kind of want it to be relatively boring and bland, to be honest, so that it's a bit more appealing to a lot of people. You don't want any weird styles that most people won't like. Number 5 is we're looking for low maintenance properties where possible. My brother actually bought a place recently, and the backyard of this place was like a full project in itself, and it had some beautiful trees and a little creek going through the back of it, and it was all very nice, but the amount of work that's needed to get that up to speed and have it looking beautiful is not worth it. And I would have never bought that property personally, but it should be a blank slate if possible. Just, grass, flat, level, normal square layout, no little bits of concrete or weird stuff in the middle, just a plain space for kids to run around in or whatever, and maybe some foliage at the back and sides. Now, regardless of what you think about, landscape design or whatever it is, generally the more conservative the better, because whoever comes in, they have a blank slate and they can do whatever they want to it, rather than you having this really crazy backyard that's like either A, too much maintenance to like fix it all up, or B, the style is just not what they like, and some people can't be bothered fixing it themselves. And for me personally, if I don't want to see a pool there, I can only think about my old man. When we were kids, we had a pool in the back, and my dad always moaned about how much he had to clean it and use it, and we used it heaps as kids, but as we got older, nobody used it. Anyone with a pool would be able to relate to this, and it's just a bunch of work. And it's the same reason personally why I am looking for a house without a pool. As fun as they are, I know that I'm like not my wife or my son, like nobody's gonna look after it besides me. And I could pay someone, but then it's another cost for something that I personally don't want to look after or pay for either. So generally I'll avoid a pool. I just want really boring backyard, not heaps of plants, not a lot to do, just mow the lawn, mow the front lawn, and you're done. Number 6 is I want the home to be family friendly. Now, I've kind of mentioned this a couple of times now, but generally for many of these houses, you want it to be family friendly. They're typically the people buying houses. I'm not really personally interested in buying apartments. In most cases, I'm not interested in townhouses or duplexes. I want to buy a full-size house. Generally, I look for the first 3 properties I bought were all 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car spot. I like that combo. I think that's a good amount of space. People can grow into it as well. So it's not the kind of house that, you might have 1 or 2 kids now, but you could have a third and still live there. Whereas if you have a 3-bedder, sometimes that's a little bit more tricky, and some people might be scared off. Not to say that the 3-bedders aren't good, but I generally will try and get a 4-bedder where possible. I would consider a 3-bed if it scored really, really well on all the other criteria. And some 3-bedders are very, very spacious. The rooms are all quite large and it doesn't feel claustrophobic. So sometimes a large 3-bedder can be better than a really, really tight 4-bed where the 4th bedroom is probably more of a study, or it's a very, very small room anyway. And if you're curious, according to the census data from 2016, the average amount of kids that a family would have was around 1.8. So that gives you kind of an idea that if you're looking to buy a house, an investment, or even for yourself, most people are going to have roughly 2 kids on average. So I try to kind of buy houses based on a 2-kid family on average, and hopefully a bit, enough space, and like I said, enough square meterage that's enough room for them to live comfortably. And also generally I like to make sure that there is some sort of backyard. It doesn't have to be a full football field worth of grass, but I've looked at a number of houses where the house was nice, but the backyard was either fully concreted or paved, or it was like a pool and paving. For a lot of people, it looked nice, and some people like the fact that I don't have to mow the back lawn. But for a lot of people, that would be instant, fail, and it will be a house that they would never consider. So I hope you found that useful. That's 6 things that you can sort of look at when you're considering an individual property. And the whole goal of all this is to make sure that you do get a property that it appeals to a lot of people. It's going to be easier for you to rent long term. And if you ever choose to sell it, you've got enough block size, the house layout's good. It's generally like a conservative or simple design that most people would be interested in. And generally, so you get a more better or a better investment rather than getting a house that you maybe struggle to sell or rent over time.